Hello, my name is Susan Lattanzio and I'm a Research Associate within the Transdisciplinary Engineering Design Group, TREND, which is based at the University of Bath. The paper I'm presenting is entitled Classifying the Disciplinarity of Engineering Academic Literature. Contemporary engineering products and systems are getting ever more interconnected, with multiple disciplines and stakeholders involved in all aspects of the life cycle. This requires a move away from traditional reductionist discipline-based approach to go above and beyond the disciplinary boundaries. That is, there is a need for transdisciplinary engineering approaches. Despite engineering being a designated field for TD, a recent study suggests that compared to interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches, the penetration of TD is low. Although providing a view of the use of TD within engineering, this study presents a certain perspective. That is, the analysis uses the appearance of the terms MD, ID, and TD within the engineering papers. It does not look to further examine whether the papers conform to any particular definition of these terms. One of the challenges with understanding the use of TD within engineering is the loose way the term is used. Both across and within the different academic fields, a plurality of definitions of TD persist. This has resulted in a situation whereby what one author considers TD might be considered a different level of disciplinarity by another. Adding to this challenge is that funders are starting to call for research to be using a TD approach. Potentially, this inconsistency in definition, coupled with the evolving fashion for TD work, could result in a situation whereby research claiming to be TD does not meet all, or indeed any, of the existing definitions of the term. This study aims to contribute towards understanding the state of TD within engineering academic research by answering the research question: is the engineering academic literature claiming to be TD actually TD? Background to TD and the work of Jantsch. It is generally accepted that the origins of TD date back to the 1970s and the original work of Jantsch. Within this work, Jantsch asserts that for education and innovation to be of value to society, it needs to cut across the social, economic, political, technical, psychological, anthropological, and other dimensions. Jantsch defines a hierarchical framework that identifies key levels for consideration within a multi-level, multi-goal education and innovation system. Building on this framework, Jantsch defines 6 disciplinarity levels: mono, multi, pluri, cross, inter, and transdisciplinary. These definitions are constructed based on differences in cooperation and coordination within and across the purposive, normative, pragmatic, and empirical levels. Jantsch's conceptualization has not been universally accepted. To date, there are a plurality of approaches proposed to differentiate between disciplinary levels. The inconsistency is compounded by the evolution from simple abstract categorizations to typologies which acknowledge the nuances and complexity within each of the disciplinary states. Whilst a number of approaches for assessing disciplinarity exist, there have been few attempts to apply these to characterize the disciplinarity of research efforts, and thus there is no universally accepted approach to classify the disciplinarity of academic engineering literature. Within this work, we address this gap by operationalizing the work of Jantsch, creating a coding agenda, and applying it to the academic engineering literature. Method. The aim of this study was to contribute to understanding how TD approaches are being used within engineering academic research. This study assesses the disciplinary state of engineering academic literature, which appears to be TD, to see if it meets the definition of TD as proposed by Jantsch. The dataset we used within the study was extracted from Scopus. The dataset was limited to papers which scopers identified as falling within the engineering subject area, with the term transdisciplinary within the abstract. This is used as a proxy for work claiming to be TD. To ensure a level of quality, the search was constrained to peer-reviewed journal articles, and for accessibility, those written in English. Applying this search, 177 papers were returned. The code and agenda was applied to the abstracts in order to assess the disciplinary level. Detail on how the code and agenda was created is explained in detail within the paper. This exercise was completed by 4 separate research associates, with the disciplinary level assigned being the mode of their responses. The results of the 177 records within the dataset, 3 papers were excluded because they were not research contributions, but rather informal essays or publication volume descriptions. The results depict application of the code and agenda to the remaining 174 abstracts. Analysis of the papers showed them to have been produced over the period 1980 to 2018, with accelerated growth seen from 2000 onward. This supports that over recent years, a greater number of engineering journal papers are using the term TD. Application of the code and agenda shows that of the 174 papers, less than a quarter, 24%, meet the definition of TD. A total of 111 of the abstracts are classified as ID, that's 64%, with 11 classified as either multi, pluri, or cross. No papers were categorized as monodisciplinary. The reason behind the TD-ID coding differences are not known, but could be both unintentional or intentional. Unintentional rationales might look towards the polarity of disciplinary frameworks. In this regard, the authors may not have conducted research which is TD according to Jansch, but which might meet alternative definitions. Intentional rationales might look towards the current trend towards TD, which may encourage research to be framed as TD in order to meet funder requirements or to appear novel. Conclusions and future work. Within this study, we seek to understand whether engineering papers claiming to be TD are actually TD. Our results show that only around a quarter, 24%, of papers referencing TD within their abstract meet the definition of TD found in the original classification work of Jansch. The majority, 64%, were classified as ID. These findings highlight that within the academic engineering literature, there is still much inconsistency in what might be reported as TD, and point to the importance of establishing clearer disciplinary definitions and rules which differentiate TD from ID. Future work. The research within this paper seeks to address whether engineering papers that claim to be TD are indeed TD. During this work, we operationalise the work of Jansch and use this to create a means to classify disciplinarity, although adding to understanding, for a more complete picture, further research is required. Investigations of possible overlaps between TD, ID and MD in the literature. Research in this area has commenced within Trend. The results of this study are presented as a separate paper within this conference. Undertake research which allows the results of this work to be triangulated. In this regard, studies should look to apply alternative disciplinarity typologies to the same dataset used within this work, or apply the method used within this study to different academic fields. This work looks to identify whether engineering academic literature claims to be TD is TD. The alternative question is whether there is work which is not identified as TD, which meets the definition.